He will lead us through the topic of autism. So, our title for this afternoon is Autism Awareness. Destiny received a master's degree and is a registered behavioral technician. She is a bilingual behavioral therapist who serves infants and adolescents with developmental delays. For the past 5 years, Destiny devoted her work to early intervention for children of 18 months to 3 years old who are at risk of or diagnosed with autism, spectrum disorder, and other developmental delays. Me, myself, is so excited and willing to learn about this topic, and I think all the people here now are so. So I'll give the stage to Destiny. Please welcome.
Hello, hello, hello. All right, we are live and it's not five, but it's five somewhere. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good. You guys are live? No, you guys didn't eat too much? You did eat too much. Oh boy. Well, that means I have a really difficult job to do, keeping you all awake and engaged during this presentation. We're starting a little bit later than anticipated. We just have had a little bit of technical difficulties. Fun fact, these new MacBooks don't have USBs anymore. Didn't realize that until about an hour ago. So I had to run home and grab one of the adapters, and so they're back there graciously trying to work through all the technical difficulties with my presentation right now. So if you guys can just give us a little bit of grace as they do that, we'd appreciate it. So as they mentioned in the bio, I am a registered behavioral technician. I'm an RBT. I just recently got my master's earlier this year in special education and am currently studying to get my board certified behavior analyst certification to further my work with kiddos on the spectrum and eventually other individuals on the spectrum as well. My expertise primarily is working with early intervention. So that means I have 5 years of experience working with kiddos as young as, my youngest baby was 15 months, and as old as 3 years old, or 12 years of age, but my expertise is within 18 months to 3 years. So I am by no means an expert in the topic of autism at large. I cannot say that. I will put that disclaimer out there right now. However, the kiddos that I do work with either have had red flags, what they call red flags or symptoms of autism, and or have received diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So I'm really excited to share with you guys some information and tips that you can take away, hopefully to get a better understanding of what autism spectrum disorder is, because it is a spectrum. I will put that out there right now. It's not like necessarily a heart attack where you can clearly identify, this is a heart attack. Somebody has had a heart attack, or this person is of this ethnic group, right, where those are a little easier to identify. The autism spectrum is a very wide spectrum, so you have different levels of severity. So we'll get into that in a little bit. I'll just start talking, and then once we get the slides up, then they'll go along with what we're talking about. How many people in here understand or know a little bit about autism? Anybody know about autism? Yes? Is there anyone that has not heard about autism ever? Well, all right. That means that conversations like these and different tools that are out there to raise awareness are doing their job. Can anybody tell me what autism is? I will ask you questions, by the way. I'm a teacher at heart, so I might ask you to interact with me. If you can holler out whatever the answers are to these questions, that would be great. Can anybody just very succinctly and clearly tell me what autism spectrum disorder is? Everybody shy? Nobody knows? Okay. Does it affect the mind or does it affect your, okay, yes, it affects the mind. There we go. There's one aspect of it. So autism spectrum disorder is a developmental condition. I will not call it a disability. That's what it's labeled as because I think that there are many abilities on the spectrum, not necessarily disabilities. But it is a developmental condition or disability caused by varying things in the brain or differences in the brain. These differences do vary in expression in each person, hence why it has the name autism spectrum disorder. Causes can be genetic, however, there are other causes that are not yet known. We are still learning so much in the scientific world about autism, and so there's still a lot of things that we don't quite understand just yet about the causes. But we have been able to, just from the cases that have been in existence that are currently prevalent, have been able to assess some of the risk factors. Does anybody know of any particular disorders or diagnoses that are considered part of the autism spectrum? You can just holler it out if you know. Autism, autism is one of the disorders. What are the disorders that are listed that are part of the autism spectrum? Asperger's, yep. Autism, somebody said. Anybody else? There's about 2 more that are umbrellaed under there. Nope. Okay. There's one called PDD-NOS, which is basically pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. I'll get into a little bit about the developmental criteria in a little bit so you guys can kind of understand how the diagnostic criteria works. And then childhood disintegrative disorder. So all of those have now recently been umbrellaed under the title of autism spectrum disorder, okay? But there are a wide range, again, of those disorders that are listed. Okay, I have a couple stats listed here. Did you guys know that autism spectrum disorder is more than 4 times more common among boys than it is among girls? So I won't get into the reasons for that because we're still studying those things, but it is more likely that you'll encounter a boy that has autism than you will a girl. And the reason being is because in girls, it's a lot harder to diagnose, and the diagnostic criteria is primarily based off of males. And so it is very difficult to diagnose a female who has autism. Autism spectrum disorder is reported to occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. So it is not something that is considered, oh, this only takes place in this particular ethnic group. It affects everybody. If you are a human being, and walking this earth, it is possible that you might encounter somebody who has autism spectrum disorder. There are about 1 in 6, which is 17% of children aged 3 to 17 years old who were diagnosed with a developmental disability as reported by their parents during a study period of 2009 to 2017. And there are about 17% of those children diagnosed with, that's a duplicate, about 1 in 44 children have been identified as having autism spectrum disorder. And this is according to estimates from the CDC's Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. 2% of the adult population in the U.S. have autism spectrum disorder. So there are quite a few individuals among us. That's about one in I believe it was 40 individuals who have autism spectrum disorder. Okay. So there is a specific diagnostic criteria that specialists use, developmental specialists use in order to assess someone as being diagnosed with autism spectrum. Unlike medical conditions like a heart attack or stroke, what other medical conditions? Diabetes, where you can do a blood test or do an MRI or a CAT scan. The diagnostic criteria is not that simple when it comes to autism spectrum disorder. There is something called a DSM-5, which is the diagnostic, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by the American Psychiatric Association. There are a series of criteria that are presented that are used in order to diagnose someone with autism spectrum. One of those things is persistent deficits in social communication and social interactions across contexts. So what that means is they have difficulty communicating is one of the, or expressive communication, receptive language deficits are some of the symptoms. The symptoms must be present in early developmental period, but they might not be fully manifest until later in life. So there are some individuals who have maybe not have been diagnosed because they're on the border where they seem like they're typically functioning and they miss the diagnostic criteria, or parents don't catch the early signs. And so it's not until they get into their late teens and then early adulthood that some of those things start to express, and then they may be able to receive a diagnosis then. Restricted repetitive patterns of behavior or interest in activities. So some of the kiddos that I work with, just as an example, a lot of them, one of the flags that we kind of look for is like excessive hand flapping. I do this when I'm excited too, so that doesn't, just because you hand flap does not mean that you are on the spectrum. However, it is something that we notice, just that repetitive behavior of hand flapping or maybe stimming on their hand, looking at particular objects for long periods of time, choosing to perseverate on a particular aspect of a toy rather than playing with the toy functionally. For example, instead of rolling a car, just spinning the wheels. Those are some things that we see in our early learners. There's also impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. And then behavior not otherwise explained or characterized by individual intellectual disability or global developmental delays are also part of the criteria. So basically, if there is not, another developmental delay like, what's another disorder? Down syndrome or global developmental delay or anything like that that can't be characterized underneath those criteria, it most likely is autism if it presents all of those other criteria. How we doing, guys? I'm like moving halfway through the presentation. You guys can't see anything. All right, hopefully I'm not boring and just sitting up here and looking at me is not putting you to sleep. Are we still alive? Y'all still with me? Yes? Okay, you know what would really help too, just to make sure you don't fall asleep, is if you move closer to me, because physical touch is a part of my love language. And since I can't touch you, if you're closer, it might be better for all of us. There we go. Wonderful. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you very much. It's very lonely up here. The chairs start way back there, and I'm way up here. It's about to get down and start walking through the aisles in a second. Okay. Can somebody carry this? Because I do need this, because since I can't see my slides up there. Okay. Nope. Thank you. A little bit closer. Yeah, right there. All right. Okay, that's better. All right. Oops. All right, so some common characteristics. Can anybody shout out some common symptoms or characteristics of autism that they've seen? Stimming. What is stimming? What does that look like? Okay. Okay. So she's saying stimming. That's like rocking back and forth, turning a light switch on and off. So repetitive behaviors. Anything else? I have a family over here who are experts, and so I know I know. They're trying to give everybody else the opportunity to answer. Anybody else? Delayed speech. That is one of the #1 concerns. Yes, delayed speech, stimming. What else? I actually gave you a few of those already, a few answers just now. Nope. Okay, difficulty in social interaction, right? Understanding social cues and social rules. All right, we are getting somewhere. What was that? Echoing, echolalia, yes, repeating certain words or sounds over and over again. Sometimes non-contextual, what we call non-contextual vocalizations, which is like saying things that don't necessarily have a context in the moment, but saying things that you've heard before. Scripting, just repeating language, but not with an intended, doesn't have a meaning to other people. Can't say it doesn't have a meaning to our kiddos, because it does. But it's just we don't speak the language, so we don't understand what they're trying to tell us. Mouthing, yes, putting things in the mouth. Oh, wow, I am official. I got a pointer. But I only know how to use it. Yeah? Oh, wow. Here we are. Okay. Common characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. So sometimes difficulty sharing interests and emotions, low affect. So that's not necessarily, when I'm happy, I can go, hey guys, I'm happy. But if I'm happy, I might go, or have a different, or just no affect at all. Failure to initiate or respond to social interactions. So if you say, hi, how's it going? And somebody just goes like that, they're not trying to be rude, but just difficulty with responding in those situations. Difficulty engaging in normal back and forth conversation. Hello, how are you? Responding with, I'm fine. How old are you? No response. Sometimes decreased eye contact or decreased appropriate use of gestures. So sometimes maybe not understanding that pointing to something means that I want you to look that way. Not looking directly in the eyes when you're talking to someone. Difficulty forming and maintaining relationships. This is something that we see in autism spectrum disorder with adults. Absence of interest in peers. You might have, especially with our younger learners, you might have noticed that they're very isolated. So instead of playing on the playground, there's a difference between shyness and having a kiddo who's on the spectrum. There are some kiddos who just prefer, they can play around and they just don't know necessarily, they're not comfortable with coming out of their shell. And then there's like, I could care less if you bring my favorite toy around, I'm still not gonna play with you. I just want the thing. So absence and interest of peers, repetitive motor, vocal movements or actions with objects, stimming. Hyper or hypo-reactivity to sensory input. So sometimes if there's a really loud noise, things that we can tolerate, even just me talking with this microphone, for some people is very triggering. So you might see like some ear covering, hyposensitivity to noise, maybe not really, a siren can go by and the kiddo just sits there and doesn't really react to it, or person doesn't react to it. Insistent on sameness, rigid thinking, or patterns or rituals. So not really doing well when it comes time to transition from play into putting on my clothes to go to school. Challenges adjusting to different settings, routines, or minor changes. So that is something that, yes. Ooh, that's a good one I didn't include. It was hard. There's a lot of things listed there. Sleep patterns, that's another flag too. Inconsistent sleep patterns, especially with the younger ones. If you're noticing that, oh, my baby's not sleeping, or they're up for 20 hours, 20 hours of the day and they only sleep for 4. Sometimes interrupted sleep patterns. It might just be, they're sleeping really well for a whole week and then the next week you're up. Right, we just experienced that yesterday. So that's a good one. All right, so there are different levels to the intensity of autism spectrum disorder. So the DSM-5 categorizes this in levels 1, 2, and 3. You may have heard the terms high functioning and low functioning. That spectrum, this is what we're covering. I really don't like using that term high functioning and low functioning just because you're a person and you're walking, you're eating, and you're breathing. How are you not functioning, right? It's just that you're not functioning. The criteria is coming from the fact that this is not functioning as typical people do, or most people tend to function in their day-to-day interactions. Okay, so, but we'll use it by levels, which is what the DSM-5 criteria uses. So level 1 is requiring some support. All right. So here's some of those characteristics that are listed as a level 1 profile person who has autism spectrum disorder. Challenges in social interactions, decreased interest in social interaction in some cases. I spelled that wrong, but able to speak clearly and engage in communication. Some challenges with maintaining a back and forth conversation, difficulty making friends, rigidity, organizational issues, and trouble with transitions. So that's what we would call considered like a high functioning or individual who is just needing a little bit of additional support and guidance in some of those social aspects, and also may have some different reactions to stimuli in their behavioral aspects. A level 2 learner or person requires substantial support. So there's noticeable issues with the verbal and nonverbal cues. So maybe they really have limited eye contact, or they're not communicating and engaging in back and forth conversation. Limited initiation and response in social interactions. Inflexible behavior. So if you transition from one thing to another, it's a thing. We got to deal with it. We got to do transition warnings. It has to be a steady preparation before you can move on to something else. Trouble with transitions, noticeable restricted or repetitive behaviors. So maybe they're not super affected, but there's some things you notice, like, something's a little different about this person. Perseverating on an object or activity. So these are actually, although we're talking about a condition, these are actually also skills that I'll get into a little bit later, because these are where some of our geniuses come from, because they're experts in one particular topic. Level 3, which is requiring intensive support. So this is what you might hear someone say as low functioning, or somebody who is highly impacted, severely impacted with autism spectrum. So severe issues with verbal and nonverbal communication, very limited social interaction, limited intelligible speech, which is what you can understand them saying, unusual methods of meeting social needs. So maybe self-injurious behavior. If a person isn't able to speak, maybe they might tap their head, or flap their hands to get your attention instead of tapping you, or maybe yell a word in order to get attention instead of requesting your attention appropriately. Difficulty coping with change, repetitive behaviors that interfere with daily functioning. Fun fact, all of us engage in stimming behavior of some sort. Everybody has repetitive behaviors that they engage in, but it's when, playing with your fingers, biting your nails. Some of those are destructive. Other forms of stimulation, but repetitive behaviors that interfere with daily functioning. So perseverating on a particular thing to where you can't move on to your next activities of the day. And then great distress with transition. So it's not just a thing for transition warnings. It's like, no, I cannot leave what I'm doing. Okay. All right. Autism spectrum disorder in adults and teens. I'll cover the adults and teens first, and then I'll get into my wheelhouse, which is the early intervention. So just be very brief, because I'm not an expert in adults and teens. So I'll cover what I can. All right, so here are some of the odds, or some of the characteristics that we see with individuals who are on the spectrum and are in their teen years or adult years. Majority of them continue to live with family members or relatives due to the intensive need of care, depending on where they are on the spectrum. Low participation in education beyond high school, higher rates of unemployment or underemployment, and then limited opportunity for community or social activities. Nearly 40% spend limited to no time with friends. So those social interactions do carry on into adulthood. One thing that I will highlight is that some people say, oh yeah, he has these little quirks when they're little. He'll grow out of it. You do not grow out of autism spectrum disorder. It's not something that you have as a child and then it goes away. That is actually a myth, and that is something that has become a commonly accepted belief, especially among a particular generation before we had a lot of this information about autism spectrum disorder, what it looks like and what some of the causes are. Early intervention and screening. All right, so I'm probably going to geek out a little bit just because this is what I do on a daily basis, and I do love it. And I'm super passionate about early intervention. I have a background in public health, so that is where that comes from. My undergrad is public health, master's is in special education, so combining the two through this presentation is awesome for me. Before we get into this, can I have everybody stand up? I see some people nodding off on me. Let's stand up, stretch, arms up. If you got sweat stains under your pits, that's all right. Fan it out. All right. Yes, there we go. All right. Touch your toes if you can. If you can't, that's okay. All right. Okay, you guys can sit back down. All right, early intervention and screening. Awesome job, Connor. I saw that, bud. Early intervention and screening. Okay. Early screening and diagnosis is extremely critical. So just like anything else, right, you want to catch a heart attack before it becomes a heart attack, right? Heart attacks have symptoms before it leads to that point. Screening, blood tests, getting those tests regular, the routine checkups are crucial to you being able to catch those things. It's the same thing with autism spectrum. So you can catch, or it can be detected and diagnosed as early as 15 months of age. So they are increasing the diagnosis criteria, and technology, right, what we understand about autism spectrum can be caught a lot earlier. Typically you can do, I counsel my parents to do like a milestones check-in at 9 months, 18 months, and 24 months of age, because those are when you start to see developmental markers, and also where you start to see some of these flags early on. By 15 months, if you're noticing some significant flags with your kiddo's development and they're not meeting their milestones, you do need to let your pediatrician know. The diagnosis criteria is also with the DSM-5. So we use the developmental history and behavior in order to diagnose. Yes? You cannot. Yeah, autism is not, that's a great question. Autism cannot be diagnosed by a blood test. You can undergo genetic testing. However, you cannot, it won't come up and say, you have autism. If it's something that's present in your family's diagnosis history, that's something different, but as far as like a genetic marker that classifies for it, we don't have that technology yet. So maybe somebody can inspire their little ones to go into research in this field, because we do need it, so that way we can detect it a lot sooner. All right. Early screening tools. There is an app if you are a new mother, or even if you're not, you know a new mother, or know somebody who has a young child. You can use Cdc Milestone Tracker App. So if you go into your app store, Cdc Milestone Tracker, it'll basically highlight at this age your baby should be doing X. At this age your baby should be doing Y. And then you can determine, okay, my baby's not doing that, and I checked at 12 months and they're still not doing these things. Or at 24 months they're doing things that a 12-month-old should be doing. If there's a significant delay like that in their development, it's very important that you let your doctor know right away. Be a over-concerned parent. I strongly encourage it. Even if you're like, I don't know, I saw one symptom, let your doctor know, because it might be that one symptom that could open up the catalyst and help to open up the doors to maybe other symptoms you weren't aware of, or your parents may not have been aware of. Oh, we are. That's what I said, Connor. I don't know what happened. Did I do that? All of them. Help. Well, going back to the drawing board. Thank you. By the way, how much time do I have? Nobody ever told me how much time I have. Okay, I'm going to limit it to an hour, because the attention span of people, it ain't there. No. Some of my kiddos who are on the spectrum have better attention spans than some people who don't. That's hilarious. Okay. Are you getting there for me? Thank you so much. My brother is the best tech support ever, and he understands that I'm slightly challenged in this area. Okay. I was on common risk factors, or actually early screening and diagnosis. So you can talk to your child's primary doctor about concerns or delays and ask for a referral to a specialist as early as need be. What will typically happen if you present your doctor, let's say you say, my kiddo has a communication delay. I noticed they're not yet saying any type of sounds. Awesome. They're not making sounds, but I noticed my cousin, who's the same age, is starting to babble and starting to say that mama and papa, like what's happening? Some doctors might say, oh, that's okay. Everybody learns and expresses language at a different age. However, speech delays are one of the most commonly missed risk factors that eventually, remember how I talked about when a kiddo gets of a certain age in their teens, it might have just been a speech delay that was present at the moment, but later on, you start to see some of these challenges in the social context that are coming up during the teen and adult years. So even if it's just a speech delay, it is very important you let your doctor know, and do not decline a referral to a specialist. Because what happens is, I get those referrals, or not the referrals to the specialist. I'll get a referral from a kiddo who goes to regional center and says, hey, my kiddo has presenting speech delays. I'll read the report, and I'm like, oh, okay. I can't diagnose with autism, I'll say that right now. However, I've worked with a lot of kiddos long enough to be able to identify the risk factors, and 9 times out of 10, I can suspect if a kiddo will receive a diagnosis at age 3. So some of them just started off with the speech concerns, and then by age 3, they receive the diagnosis of autism spectrum. So do not write that off if that's the only concern present. Specialists that are qualified to diagnose are developmental pediatricians. So your pediatrician may not be qualified to diagnose. It needs to be a developmental pediatrician. This is somebody that has certification and is qualified through the DSM-5 criteria. Child neurologist, child psychologist, or psychiatrist are all qualified to diagnose. Here are some of the common risk factors. I use risk because autism spectrum disorder is just a difference and a variation in some of the expressions. And a variation of typical development. So here's some of the risk factors. Advanced parent age. So if you are pregnant at a later age, a later stage in life, it is possible. This could be a concern. Pregnancy and birth complications. So low birth weight, multiple pregnancies if you have twins, and then premature birth. Genetic factors are also a risk factor. So changes in certain genes. If there is a sibling who has autism, it is very likely, or somewhat likely, that another one of your kiddos might have, or if that child has a sibling, it is very likely that that child may have some risk factors or could have autism as well. Similarly, if there's autism in the family, it could have skipped a generation, maybe you don't have it, but your brother does, and then that your child can also have autism. I'm terrified to push the next button. Early intervention. So what happens if my kiddo is on the spectrum? What do I do? That is not the end of the world. I tell parents all the time, the good news is if they are seeing me, you're in the right place, because I do early intervention. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA, which is what the service is called, is the most effective treatment for children diagnosed with or at risk of autism, especially when the services are received early, which is why a kiddo can qualify for free services up until age 3. So if you do that, all the screening tools, check the milestones and note, my kiddo's diagnosed, my kiddo is presenting severe communication and social delays. They just like to spin wheels on the floor and don't play with anybody. You can go to a regional center. So here in California, we do have the support of the regional centers for early intervention. This is not something that exists outside of California, so there are plenty of services in Cali. So if you have a family member who are outside of Cali and maybe don't have access to these systems, they might need to relocate. But regional center funded services are free under 3 years old. Here in Orange County, you have the Regional Center of Orange County. In the Los Angeles Harbor area, so like Long Beach, Torrance, which is actually the area that I cover, you have Harbor Regional Center. In Inland, there's also a regional center, and in San Diego, there are regional centers all up and down California, but those are the ones for Southern California. You can also get services through the school district. So once a kiddo turns 3, the regional center is amazing. They help with the transition into the school district services. Unfortunately, in our schools and a lot of private education, there are not enough resources to provide the services that are needed for individuals on the spectrum or who have developmental delays. That is something that I think we need to do a better job at. However, school district does offer these services through an individual education plan to help them through their K through 12. And then insurance-funded services. If you have insurance, autism spectrum is a medical condition, and it is covered, services are covered under your insurance. So you just would need to contact your medical service provider to see if it's within your network or which providers are within your network to cover ABA services. Easter seals is also another insurance-funded source that you can go through as well. All right, so what is ABA? Yes. Yes. How do you get into Easter seals? Oh. Oh, so Easter seals covers all, it's another insurance-funded source, but don't quote me on this, but you can go directly to Easter seals. I don't think you have to contact your insurance provider to go through Easter seals. I think you can go straight to Easter seals and see what resources they have and what the criteria is for admission to get services funded through Easter seals. But Easter seals is a company that we do work with. They do private contracts, so they'll contract individual ABA companies to go and do home-based services as well. Okay. So after age 3, well, up until age 3, there are different types of services. That actually brings up a good point. You can actually get services in a center, what we call center-based services for your kiddo. You can do home therapy, which is what I do. I go into the homes and work with the kiddos and their families. Or you can do the school district services. So once they're over 3, you can do both school district services and do Easter seals, or through your insurance, if they cover the home-based therapy, you can get home-based therapy through that too. All right, so ABA is the use of scientifically supported behavioral principles to improve socially significant behavior. That is a technical term for it. Just had to put it in there for documentation purposes. Basically, in layman's terms, what that means is we study the effect of behavior on an environment or the environment on behavior and an individual's response to their environment. So what ABA is we pretty much just watch people. So if anybody has interacted with me, you have probably had ABA run on you in one way, shape, or form, and you didn't even know it. However, what we do specifically in working with autism is we look at a bunch of different developmental areas. So since there's delays in cognition, social skills, motor skills, and all of those areas, we look at where a person's skill set is, what goals the parents wants them to work on, because we can't make a goal that we think is good. We have to work directly with the parents, because you guys are there with them all the time. And then we develop a very systematic plan to get them to that point. So that's what socially significant means. I would like to see my child vocalize more, or I would like to see my kiddo being able to participate in circle time at school. I would like to see them being able to functionally play with toys instead of just spinning them in circles. So those are things that we work on. ABA is based largely on the work of B.F. Skinner's experimental analysis of behavior. In order for ABA to be effective, there are, however, some things that need to take place, because everyone has had a different experience with ABA, especially those who have had experiences on the spectrum. So if you do tell them, hey, yeah, I was at this seminar and she was like, oh, you should get ABA. You were asking me about your son that just got a diagnosis. You should get ABA. Not everybody's going to be thrilled about your suggestion. It's very important to understand that. ABA does not have the brightest history. Just to give you guys an update, ABA has originally, those are where we get the scary views of like being in the mental facility locked up in the straitjacket, and there's really restrictive methods that are used and trying to shake someone into having a behavior because we didn't understand stimming. Those are things that people think about when they think about ABA, and unfortunately that is not what ABA is today. And if that's what you see in ABA, you need to report that company. Okay. So in order for ABA to be effective, we do have to have entry into a program early on. So it can still be effective even if you have a kiddo who's diagnosed late. However, the earlier you get them diagnosed and admitted into an ABA program, the better off they'll be, because we're already working on skills that they can start generalizing and applying in different contexts. Intensive intervention, so they need to be receiving, typically the hours depend. In Harbor Regional Center for infant cases, we're seeing a lot of like 4 and 6 hour contracts per week. So like they'll get 4 to 6 hours of services in home. But you need a really intensive intervention schedule. So a lot of the other kiddos in Easter seals get like 20 to 40 even hours per month or per week, just depending on their contract service level. Active parent involvement, this is the most important. Just like with if you're don't have a child who is on the spectrum, you know how important it is for you to be involved in your child's life. Can I get an amen? Yes, it is very important for you to be involved. You can't send them to school and expect them to just learn, because there's something called tarea, which is homework, right, for you to help them with at home. So we do have, part of ABA is parent involvement, so the parents do need to be actively involved in the treatment goals. The goals are individualized, so no two programmings look the same, even if we teach the same skill. What I teach for Connor might be different from what I teach for Samantha, because they're both very different learners. A specific curriculum needs to be introduced. We have to use empirically validated ABA teaching strategies to make sure we don't use any of those scary techniques, right, or restrictive or traumatic techniques. And then ongoing training and supervision needs to be happening. So I am an RBT, but I'm also a supervisor. So when I go out, I need to make sure that my instructors are implementing the programs as I wrote them, and that they're using ABA empirically validated techniques, so that way we can maintain that ethical responsibility. And clear measurable goals to indicate success. So I can't just say, Samantha's gonna learn how to jump. How to jump where? Where is she gonna be jumping? Is she just gonna start jumping just in place? Like, is she gonna jump when there's something to jump over? What is she jumping over? How many times is she gonna jump over it? How many times should we teach her to jump over it? We have to teach very specific goals so that way we can measure and track progress. Okay, I pushed it, but it's not going. Okay. All right, so there's some more characteristics of ABA. I won't go into too much detail, but we do break down the skills into smaller steps. So for instance, if I want to teach someone how to wash their hands, I will need to break down, turn on the water, get the soap, rub your hands together, rinse your hands off, turn off the water, dry your hands. How many of you guys realize that all of those steps go into washing your hands? You didn't. Yes?
Another, I think, important thing to mention with the steps is autism, children with autism tend to be very visual. So
Yes.
they build social stories to go along with the steps so that they can see the pictures, so actions and the words.
That's a very good point. So there are some kiddos who are, visual cues are helpful. Sometimes the visual cues can be overstimulating depending on the learner, but especially like for Connor's age, with the older kiddos, social stories are very effective. So with washing your hands, you can't just have this process. For young learners, for my kiddos, we do a lot of physical prompting. So I'll stand behind them while they're standing on a chair, take their hands from behind and walk them through the whole process, and then systematically fade each step and allow them to do it by themselves until they can do the whole thing. But for our older learner, I don't know if you guys saw Connor, but Connor is tall. I'm not gonna stand behind him and take him by the hands and prompt him to wash his hands. So those social stories or visual cues would be a lot easier to help him to understand, okay, turn on the water, what's next? Get the soap. Kind of like following a recipe. So essentially that's what we're doing with skills, is making a recipe. Thanks for bringing that up. We do tailor the treatment according to the unique needs and skill sets of the individual learner, and then also apply the skills across context. So it's great that you can wash hands at home. Can you also do it at school? What about the sink at the church? Can you do it there? What about at the park? This is a sink too. Can you do it there? So just making sure that that learner is able to do those things across context. So again, ABA is used to teach skills across developmental areas. We don't just work on social cues. We work on cognitive skills, motor skills, communication, self-help skills like washing your hands, using the bathroom, taking a shower, all of those things. And they are applied in multiple settings. So out in the community, it's great you can do it at home, but now let's see if you can do it in the community. Let's see if you can do that at school or at work. And this can be applied to other fields and contexts as well. ABA is also applied in relationships, parenting, smoking cessation programs. I do, all of my family members and my significant other, they all know. Sometimes they can sense when I'm running ABA or trying to get a certain response out of them. You can apply it in all contexts. It's very, very simple. All right, So here's some of the key takeaway points that I hope you guys can recall. That was a lot of information. Some of it probably went over your head or in one ear and out the other. But the main point is that autism spectrum disorder is a spectrum. No two individuals on the spectrum are the same. There are levels to it. People with ASD are people first. So a lot of times you can look at a learner who might be a level 3, right, who's low functioning or who may need a little bit more support and assume that they don't have desires or be able to express affection. But they can. They have feelings, they have desires, and they have goals. So it is important that we do understand that when we're interacting with them and not forget that. Autism is increasing in prevalence. So there is more cases that exist today than exist 10 or even 20 years ago. There's no known cure, but ABA and early intervention is the most effective treatment for autism, and early screening and intervention is absolutely critical for success. All right, that's all I have. Are there any questions? Yes. Can a level 3 be reduced to level 2 and then reduced to level 1? That's a great question. Because it's a classification of criteria, I'm not totally sure how the diagnosis criteria works, like if they can go back in 5 years and be diagnosed as a level 2. However, in the work that I do, we have seen individuals that kind of grow in their levels. So I've had one kiddo who moved from a level, and this is an early intervention specifically. I've had one kiddo who would be considered a level 3 profile, that by the time we were done with the program in a year, we're at a level 2. So they started having some communication bursts, understanding more of the social context, even though they still didn't fully engage and play with other people, because that's just not their preference. They understood, this is a card, this is how you play with it, or here's a crayon, you can color. So they started to understand some of those social cues and things. So there can be a decrease in severity. However, I don't want you to get the idea that just because they go through services that they can graduate levels to the point where you don't see any signs. Okay, that's a great question. Any other questions? Okay. Here's some of the positives? Sure. Well, that's why I saved it for the end. Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. I don't know his name. Oh, that's a good point. So he's saying, just for the people that are tuning in the live stream, this seemed to be a very negative presentation. I'm so sorry if that was the connotation. Hopefully it wasn't negative. But there are positive sides. So there are a lot of individuals who have made extreme contributions to society, right, despite the fact that they do have autism spectrum disorder. He mentioned an example of a young man who's on America's Got Talent. Susan Boyle, I think, also, who's on America's Got Talent, was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And we see these people, and they have extraordinary capabilities. So that perseverating on a specific activity is not a weakness at all. That's actually something that if we learn how to guide it in the right direction and channel it, well, man, there's your engineers, your next musicians, you have your next auto mechanics and specialists in different areas. So that's a really, really good point. Those skills. Yeah. He's saying parents have to know how to develop those skills in their kiddos. Yeah. That's also something that in ABA, which is the fun part of working with the individuals over 3, is that we start working in more of those specific goals after we get through some of the basic goals like attending. So for the early learners, we have to really work on like building eye contact. So that's something that we teach. Probably didn't know you could teach eye contact. I didn't 5 years ago, but you can teach eye contact. You can teach how to respond to instructions, how to engage with a toy, and all of those things. So yeah, you could even work on some of those things. If you notice that your kiddo has a very specific niche, you can start build even a behavior plan with your behavioral therapist and say, hey, I want them to learn how to learn how to tolerate sitting at a piano, because when he does sit at the piano, he does amazing. However, he just can't sit for longer than 10 minutes. So you might build a routine-based schedule with visual cues and stories to be able to increase toleration at the piano for a concert or for something like that. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How to interact and support. That's a really great question. I was waiting for that. Um, so she's asking, are there any resources or any suggestions on individuals who don't have a kiddo on the spectrum or a person um, on the spectrum or haven't interacted much? What advice do you have for those individuals to support the families and the individuals on the spectrum? Because a lot of families, and I have a family that I'd like to invite up in a little bit to give a little bit more some context and just share their personal experience. But a lot of times we see individuals who are different from us and we stare at them. We just stare. And sometimes we stare because we don't know what to do and we're trying to figure out what's happening. We're not used to it, which is why we have presentations like this, hopefully to help with that awareness. I think the best thing would just be to continue to increase your awareness and understand that this is not, just because you see somebody jumping around and flapping their hands, they're not having a seizure. Just understand that they may be excited about something or even overstimulated. Maybe they're watching Yo Gabba Gabba and just got excited and couldn't help themselves, so they let out their version of a hallelujah, and you just leave them be and let them go ahead and express themselves the way that they do. But actually, I want to invite up Connor's family and see if they have some things that they can share with us too. I met Connor and his family at Breath of Life earlier this year. I had went to visit with my friend Summer, and they were giving a presentation on Autism Awareness, and I was just like blown away because I'd never heard a parent speak the way that she did. She gave a presentation like this with Connor standing up there with her, and I was just like blown away. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and Connor.
Connor, you can take your mask off. Take your mask off. It's okay up here.
Thanks, Connor.
Put it in your pocket. Test. My name is Monique. What is your name? Okay. He has to concentrate on doing what I asked him to do.
Please.
What is your name?
It's Connor Toozy.
Okay. And how old are you?
I'm going in.
How old are you?
How old are you?
Okay, so sometimes, as you can see, the question is being rehearsed in his mind. And Connor is 17, and you can see he's very tall. He's actually the tallest person in the house now. He passed up Daddy. And he was diagnosed at 3.5 years old. He did have some of the signs that Destiny was talking about, but we didn't necessarily think about it as the signs. It was more like, he's a boy. Boys develop slower than his peers. We actually, Connor, can you come stand by mommy, please? 3, 2, 1. Thank you. We had a birth, explosion at our church. The year that he was born, there were 11 children born in that year. So there were only 3 boys in those 11 children. So all the girls, of course, were doing things quicker than the boys. So that's what I thought that he fell along. And I actually taught Connor sign language. At 8, 9 months, he was doing sign language. And I just thought it was a fun thing to do, to be able to communicate with your child before they could talk. So when he wasn't speaking, I thought maybe it was because he doesn't have to. He knows how to do the sign language. My sister did say that she thought we should get him kind of checked out, but I thought, okay, he's an only child at home. I'm an older parent. My mom, who is our primary caregiver, was at home with him, so we thought we'd put him in daycare at least 2 days a week so we could get some social engagement with other children. And then that's where they kind of brought to our attention that he wasn't playing with the children, engaging. He engaged in what they call parallel play. So if a child was playing with another child in this way, he didn't want to play with them, but he would play over here, watch them, and do what they do, parallel play. Connor on the spectrum is considered moderate to severe. His language skill, although you can hear that he talks, he's verbal, but he doesn't have the expressive language skills or back and forth question and answer as we kind of demonstrated. Some days that goes very well, and he can do that because in speech therapy, and on his IEP, he's learning how to do appropriate responses to basic questions. So some days that goes very well, and other days that doesn't. He is affectionate, as you can see, which isn't always the case with children with autism, and he has days where he cannot be touched. The sleep patterns do play a big part of that. Last night, he had a sleepless night. We had a sleepless night. So I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to make it. When he does have that, you would think, when you're sleepy, when you haven't slept all night, how do you feel?
Cranky.
Yeah,
Cranky?
You stuck?
You stuck?
Stuck.
Okay.
Yeah, you stuck?
Sometimes he does get stuck, and that's what we talked about. Are you stuck? Let's get unstuck. So yeah, you feel cranky and a little tired, right? But he actually gets more hyper, and he gets very giggly and more touch sensitive. So whereas he can touch me, as you can see, if I'm touching him, he's liable to move out of my space. So he wants to dictate the touching. So another thing that happens more is a lot of mouthing. Unfortunately, that means inappropriate objects in the mouth. Most of the times it's paper, so at least that's not harmful, but sometimes it could be something more harmful that he picks up from the ground or something of that nature. So we have to be constantly observant. One of the tools that I got as Mommy, about 10 years ago maybe? About 10 years ago, someone that I worked with, networking with, had introduced me to this book. It's called The Reason I Jump. And it's actually written by a Japanese autistic child. At the time this was authored, he was 13 years old. It's one of the most translated books, actually, for autism, and one of the few that's written by a child.
That's excellent.
So it's really amazing because it's really written very simply. It has a question, and he answers the question from how he deals with different situations. So it gave me such insight as to some of the things and challenges that Connor has. What did you do with your headphones? You put them away? So you saw that he had his headphones on. He's very sound sensitive. As Destiny mentioned with the mic, sometimes that's a little bit too much for him. It gets a little bit overstimulated with that. One of the things that the book describes is that helped me was like going to the airport. When you go to the airport, there's so many sounds around you. But as you walk through the airport, you're able to tune them out, right? You don't hear about all the different flights because I'm going to gate 38, and that's exactly where I'm going to. Thank you. And I don't need to worry about all the other gates. I don't hear the people talking at the restaurant as you're passing by. I don't hear the announcements being made because it's not my name. You know how you can tune in when it's just your name? Well, the book describes, imagine if you couldn't tune that out. and you had all this sound coming at you all at once, and there's no screening or filtering process. So imagine how you would feel trying to walk through that field. And when it was describing that, I finally kind of understood why he holds his ears or makes his own sounds to kind of eliminate the sounds that are coming in at him. So that was just a simple example of how I was able to maybe get a little bit more insight into how he's feeling, because I was based off of a child that was experiencing these things himself. And one of the things that's really been helpful in the ABA is that we did get that very early on, and we got in-home services through the school as well as through the regional center. And it helped us be able to build things to help behaviors. So Connor, what are we working for? What are we working for?
5 below.
Okay, 5 below. So we want him to have a super day. Every day, his behavior is talked about at night. And he gets a review of how his behavior impacted others as well as, he himself. So he can get, can you be quiet just a moment? Let mommy talk? Thank you. Okay, so he gets 1 to 5 tickets, because one of the things they taught us in ABA is that no matter how difficult and challenging the day, even if you wanted to jump off a bridge, that there is something redeemable about that day. Yeah. And you need to always encourage your person, okay? I want to always encourage my son, even when it's challenging. So even when he gets a 1 ticket day, which happens, I want to tell him what I was proud of him about. And then we want to discuss where the challenges were and how we can improve it, and leave him with a hope that tomorrow is a new day, right? Isn't the Bible tell us that? A mercy is renewed every morning, right? So tomorrow you get to work fresh for a new super day, okay? And we can forget about this day except what we're learning from it. So then he gets to trade those tickets in for different things. And there's a big prize on the weekend, and he knows in advance what he's working for. So unfortunately, this week was a little bit more challenging, and he didn't get the number 1 thing he was going for, which was DreamWorks puzzle from Amazon. He likes puzzles. So I still want to leave him with something to work for. So we go down the scale of what there is left for him to still work for. And he can trade these tickets in for ice cream or for, he said, 5 Below or Dollar Tree items. Our biggest award is SeaWorld. We have an annual pass at SeaWorld. We used to have a place I won't mention but has mouse ears, but can no longer afford there. Well, plus they have a reservation system now that if you have an annual pass, you're not guaranteed to get in, and I can't say you earned it and then tell them we can't go. So
that's a good point. Let me piggyback on that one. So what she's mentioning is a reinforcement system. So the way we teach new skills is by establishing something to work for. So like she's saying, what are we working for, Connor? 5 Below. Okay. So there's a certain thing that she's expecting Connor to do in order to obtain that system. This is something you can apply in parenting as well, just with your babies or your significant other. Set up a reinforcement system. That way you have something to work for. And then it encourages you to continue that behavior. So that's the beauty of it, is that the more reinforced you get by doing a particular activity, the more likely you are to do that thing.
And some of the things that he knows that help him obtain that, one of his prayers is to be loving and kind and obedient. So we talk about what that means to be loving and what it means to be kind and how do you obey. So like say even in school rules, and we talked about being visual, so I'm gonna do our visual thing about school rules review every day before he gets on a bus.
Mask on. That's all. Except for home. Except for home. Stay and see at your best kid. But if you make focus on school, they'll just shut up.
Okay.
So you make yourself just make yourself a slave of coming.
Okay, so you saw he was a little bit rushed through that, but there's a visual learning that did have like cue pictures, but instead of having that now, we'll go through the signs, so to speak, and he knows that this is what it means to obey. This is how I get a super day, so that you help him be able to remember that and accomplish those things. And when there's a breakdown, we don't address it in the time of a meltdown. That's like the absolute worst time to do it. And what I'm still learning, especially as you see how big my son is, he does still have meltdowns. So what I'm still learning is how to not engage with him in that challenge and struggle. I have to disengage, actually, to try and de-escalate the meltdown, which is counterintuitive as it seems, but it's actually what works best and what they taught us in ABA.
So I have a question then for you, Monique, piggybacking off of what that was actually my mom back there, but piggybacking off of what she said. So she was asking too, like, what kinds of things would you counsel other people to do to be a support to you? Because Connor does do things sometimes that people aren't used to. So how would you counsel them to kind of respond when he's stimming, or even when he's like engaging in some of the vocal stereotypy or scripting?
Scripting, okay. One of the key things you said was don't stare. Almost like when you stare, it almost encourages him to continue in the behavior, because he's kind of getting that attention of what's going on. As far as this is stemming. Okay, it's getting a little long, so we're gonna keep it a little short. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, as far as that's very helpful for us, is working on skill sets of large and fine motor skills and how to build those. So Connor can jump, as you can see, right? That's a large motor skill. But to combine large motor skills, Connor, can you demonstrate a jumping jack? Do a jumping jack. Can you do a jumping jack? A jumping jack was hard for him to learn because it combines two motions, which looks easy for us, but for him was hard to combine how I move my arm in conjunction with my legs.
She's asking,
Yes,
did you
change
see
in behavior with
according to
food.
the food?
Yeah, so that was one of the things we did mention as symptoms. That it's very specific in their diet and what they will eat and what they won't. So I have tried different changes. Definitely I've gotten away as much as I can from some of the processed foods. And some of them I can't, because it's like goldfish or something like that he wants. But, like any of the meats, we've tried to go vegetarian, honestly, in certain ways. He doesn't like the textures of some of those foods. We tried to go gluten-free. That's something that is encouraged. And people have said that they've seen different behaviors. The challenge is the foods that he will eat are limited. So it's hard to make the shift sometimes. But people have reported changes in behavior, cutting down the sugars, obviously, and some of the wheat-based, like I said, gluten, or some of the meats, but definitely processed foods make a difference.
That's a good point. Oh, I thought you were going to hold. Okay. You want this?
There's another thing that kind of you asked about how people can support. Awareness is the biggest thing, so this is helpful. But some shows are starting to do more and more to bring that awareness. So Connor, do you know who this is? Can you tell them who this is?
Please tell us this is Miss Julia.
Julia. Julia is a Sesame Street character, and she has autism. Hands. She has autism. And so they're teaching children to now understand and see how people with autism may play differently, may think differently, may talk to them differently, so that the building the awareness in children, hopefully, will help as they grow. And tell you the truth, children are actually a little better at accepting autism than adults are. And it may be because of a generational thing. We're becoming more and more aware of it. And so the children are more used to seeing it. One of the things with his school, he has an excellent teacher. She's very passionate about autism, and she does a lot of interaction with the general ed, so that they can have that direct contact. So Connor knows sign language. A lot of the people in the classroom are nonverbal. So she brings in an ASL class once a week, and that gives them a chance to engage with the children with autism. They learn sign language if they don't know it, or get a chance to speak with someone that understands their language. So that's one way. They have some other different class groups that come in, and she also has what she calls community-based, what's the I stand for? Community-based? Intervention, yeah, I don't usually. And they go on field trips, which is really walking trips to, say, the mall, and they have scavenger hunts. So their scavenger hunts are different. So they may have a logo, like Barnes & Noble, and they have to find that logo, and once they find it, they're writing down the store hours and stuff like that. So things that help them understand how to work functionally in a community and read the signs that they see. So those are important ways to help them adapt. He's learning to cook, wash clothes. These are all fun things that he's learning at school. When he tries to bring them home, we have suds all over the laundry room.
That's generalization, right? That's learning in different contexts and settings.
But transition is another challenge that she mentioned that is very difficult, and can cause a meltdown if he doesn't have enough cues to be understood why we're changing something. Coming here is different. He's never been to this church before, which is part of the energy that you're seeing. These are people he's never seen before. So I'm actually proud of how quiet he is, even though he's not still. He's very quiet, because usually that promotes outbursts when he doesn't know where he is and what have you. So I thank you for coming, and this is one of the big ways that people can help, because I am learning, though, when something happens in public, that people are more aware, because they may come to help support, either verbally or just seeing how they can assist, versus saying, like, she has no control over it. What is wrong with that child? That's no longer a child. What is wrong with this man-child? And it's a very real fear as a parent, knowing that one of his favorite pieces of clothing, not now when it's hot, but is a hoodie. And he's tall, and he's a black male. And so if someone calls him, he's not going to turn and answer the call. So how is that response if it's someone in authority, a police?
Get out on the floor.
Right.
Don't come close to me.
Right. So it's things that we're trying to teach him, how to appropriately respond and who to respond to. They teach it in school as well. The biggest part of my success, aside from prayer, which is the biggest part, but aside from prayer, is partnerships with my village, my church family that is used to Connor and engages with him. Connor, can you come here for a second? I want to do something. And my mom at home, his teachers and
Wow.
staff.
Hold on, really quick. He just responded real quick. I don't know how many of y'all kids respond that fast to come here. Just saying.
One of the ways that the kids have been, I guess, taught by Connor to engage with him is he has a special high five that he developed at summer camp. So we're going to demonstrate it real quick.
Ooh.
So just teaching kids, children, adults how to engage. At 17, one of the things is, not just at 17, but we've been going through adolescence, which is challenging for any parent. But with a child with autism, it becomes what's appropriate for public and what's not through the self-discovery stage. And so something as simple as at church, no running in church, please. As simple at church as hugging. You know how we greet before COVID, how we used to greet people all the time. It's just, we had to stop. You know, heard the school rule was hugging is for home. So we have to teach boundaries because he doesn't get why at church I can hug, at school I cannot. So we just have to say hugging is for home so that he's not entering into physical contact with someone that's inappropriate because of dealing with hormones that are natural, but he doesn't know how to express that. So this is something that we have struggled with because we haven't had an ABA in with the adolescents.
Yeah.
So we've been talking with the school and school psychologists and things of that nature, but it is indeed a challenge dealing with adolescents at someone that's this height and everything else. So it's a new set of rules. Things change just like they do for any other child's development.
Yeah.
But the community and school and parents and church family are huge helps to being able to survive the challenges that we deal with.
Thank you so much, Monique. Appreciate that. All right, now I do want to say, if you clap, just clap really, really light. You can clap. See, now this is one of those situations where, the clapping and non-clapping thing at church, one of those situations you can clap, but a golf clap would be helpful. So I think just raising awareness too, sometimes it's not that you have to change the way that you conduct yourselves, right? You all are still individuals, so I'm not saying you can never clap, but just being more sensitive too to some of the stimuli that are around us in our environment, the colors that are used, even the level of noise that's present. Like there are some people who are not can tolerate that as well. Connor, thank you so much. Connor, I was sitting here the whole time monitoring how well he was sitting, and even like he was referencing me quite a bit of times while I was sitting here too, and tracking me when I was walking. So that's pretty impressive considering he's never been here before. But yeah, as far as the diet goes, that is a big thing because gluten-free diets, vegetarian diets, vegan diets, these are all great things, right? As far as like making sure that your system is clean and that things are working properly. I do want to say that there's not like a correlation between, not yet, we don't have any research that shows that a change in the diet is actually curing autism, because there's no cure for that, right? But it can maybe help with some of the symptoms and like maybe not, and like regulation or even the intensity in some of the stimming behaviors. So if you do suggest the change in the diet, it is important to realize that there may be some kiddos or people like Connor who have difficulty with making those changes. And so if you do make that suggestion, don't get discouraged if a parent's like, well, I tried that and it doesn't work. You need to understand that those are suggestions. You can make a suggestion. However, it may not be effective for every kiddo.
One of the other things is my sister is queen of research. And so she has researched different things that would help soothe and calm him.
Yeah.
And also help with his focus. So I do have a health drink that he drinks each morning.
Okay.
That tries, to help him. It's a brain food thing.
Yeah.
With, some additives that help in the system get nutrients because it doesn't. So
That's
those
good.
are the things. And in the evening, he's taking melatonin.
That's good.
But also a tea that helps soothe with lavender and tension tea. It has some
That's good. That's good. She's saying that she has her sister is queen of research, especially in this topic, and so she's helped her kind of make drinks and things to supplement because of the picky eating, like, and not being able to eat or tolerate certain textures. Like, he still needs those nutrients for his brain to function properly. And of course, like, we all know the connection between food and our behavior, right? If you don't eat or you don't get enough of something, you respond differently, just like if you don't sleep. So it is, she does have a couple of things that have worked in her giving Connor, that if you do know anyone who has trouble with processing, you can come see her after and get some of those recipes. Anybody else have questions or comments? No? Okay. Yes?
So do they go to a certain school? Can they mix with?
Good question. She's asking, can individuals on the spectrum go to certain schools? Like, is there a special school, or can they mingle with the general population? A lot of cases, it depends on the severity. So you might have a level 1 learner who's just having trouble with social context, but they don't have any impeded learning or, repetitive behaviors that are interfering with those things, and so they are integrated into a regular classroom. They might be pulled out, though, for special, therapy. So if there's communication areas, they might be pulled out for speech or pulled out for one-to-one ABA. But sometimes even they might have a one-to-one aide that goes with them into that classroom and helps them navigate, like on the playground. Hey, how do we say excuse me when we want to go on the slide? How do we wait our turn? If you're 17, right, you're in high school, you need to learn. You can't just walk up to somebody and just grab wherever, right? Even though that's a 17-year-old boy's mind, some of y'all know where that's going. What happens when you don't have the boundaries to be able to guide those things? So yeah, you can be integrated, but sometimes if they are in a specialized classroom, they do have individualized education plans that work on specific goals and helping them to meet those markers. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Special day class. She's saying Connor's in a special day class, and that's at a public school. At a public school. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Anita, did you have another one? Yeah. Ask away.
I don't know. I watch TV or something. Autism, most of them reflect they're very, very smart kids. But is it they just can't control?
That's a good question. So yes, you remember how I talked earlier? I was saying that they're still human beings, and they're still people who have desires, goals, can express affection. Yes. A lot of it is just because of the lack of being able to express appropriate social cues, or even with expressing communication, it's very challenging for us to know how much they understand. So it's not that they don't understand, right? It's just there's a barrier in the expression that's not coming out. And so it's very possible that if you put a certain stimulus in front of that individual, they can probably take apart this whole laptop, or one person might be able to take apart this whole laptop and figure it out, but they may not be able to talk. So you wouldn't know that unless you gave them a laptop and they slammed it on the ground and then picked it back up and put it together better than it was. So some of that is just really challenging to know what those skill sets and those strengths are. We got a question or a comment back here. Okay.
My dealing with Connor as being the primary one at home, I've always treated him as if he was normal.
Yeah.
And so I'd ask him questions. How was his day? And, just general questions that I would ask my children when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And sometimes, maybe a month later, he'll answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, he got it. And I'm surprised.
Yes.
And sometimes he can be very spontaneous, and other times it's like, okay, it just went over his head. But I still carry on a conversation with him as if he is engaging.
Yep.
Because there is a disconnect, but we don't know when that connection is going to happen.
Yep.
And so they're surprising to me when they do happen.
Yep.
But I try to keep that down on a down low, so he thinks that it's part of the regular routine. And that's what works for us at home.
That's huge in maintaining his dignity as well. Yes. So he's 17 years old. If she was to talk to him like he was 2, that's insulting. right? And so she's talking as if he's responding, right? But there's a lot of like she's filling in the conversation for him. So modeling is also really huge. She's modeling the language that would be appropriate in this context. And even though he's not responding, even up here when his mom was asking him questions, he wasn't necessarily responding, but it took him a minute. And I don't know if you guys probably couldn't hear exactly what he was saying up here, but he would respond to some of her questions later. Also, he's scripting something, but he's doing it in a particular context. I'm constantly watching, so I was observing just to see what he was doing, and he kept saying, "This is a dedicated sister. This sister is dedicated." I heard you, Connor. I heard you. I don't know if he's heard that before in the context of like standing up in front when you're speaking, and so that's his way of even like, it seems like, of praising you. And just expressing kind of associating those similar contexts. So he has his way of communicating. It just might not be appropriate in the moment, but he's has those rules of language that he's developed already. Mm-hmm. Yeah. From a movie or show, yeah. He puts it in a certain context. That's good. She's saying that sometimes his scripting, so when he is repeating something, he'll do it in the right context. So it might be like, "Hey, how are you doing?" But he'll say it in the way that he heard in the show. "I'm doing just fine," or something like that. But it's in appropriate context, but he's doing it kind of repetitively because that's the place that he's remembered, this goes with this. So I'm going to say it in that manner. That's really good.
Thing of, we unfortunately have not figured out how to channel it so that it could become career based.
Yeah.
But he can work a PC, a Mac, an iPad, a Kindle. He can go back and forth, navigate, create folders, and from age, well, at school he had at 4 the students were creating something, and he created his instead of from the set, what do you call those things? No, the set.
The folders that are there, the apps that are already there.
What do you call it? I'm sorry, I can't think of the word. But anyways, the things that are a set template.
Okay.
He created his own individual thing. In folders, unfortunately, he could keep deleting his apps. We got an iPad because Apple was the first to have a lot of apps for autism.
Yeah.
And he kept deleting it, and I finally figured out, after much frustration, he liked seeing it jiggle. So he didn't understand that when they jiggle and then you touch it, you're deleting it. But
he was just stimming on the jiggling.
Right. But he had these folders, and I thought my husband had created the folders. And so they were education, games, and something else. And when I brought the apps back, I was like, well, how do I get those folders? So I took it to my husband thinking he did it. He says, I don't know how to do that. I didn't do that. I know my mom didn't do it. So later on, about 2 days later, I saw him putting it in, developing his folders and putting them in folders. So I realized that he knew how to do this, and no one else actually in the household had figured that part out. But he does functionally on smart TVs or anything else, able to navigate and do those things. So we'd like to try and harness that.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So with that, you could definitely use the ABA. We got a question back there. You can use ABA to start teaching those skills too. It's pretty cool.
He responded so promptly to your countdown.
Yep. She's saying he responds really calmly to her countdown when he was running away, and she said 3, 2, 1, and he stood right next to her. What happens at 1? Transition warnings, yeah.
Transition warning. So he knows that a countdown is to bring him into, I guess,
the next activity.
Whatever is the desired task or desired act. So sometimes he needs to hear the countdown, and he does it too, to know. No, I mean, he can have something eliminated, But it usually doesn't get to that because he knows this is how I transition to do. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Got another question back here. Wow, you guys are hanging in there longer than I thought. I thought people would start walking out by after an hour and a half.
I have a question. Some parents, they believe children vaccination is cause autism.
I was waiting for this
And
one.
then they don't give them. Some parents vaccinated, like anti-polio, blah, blah. So is that true or not?
That's a really, really touchy one. The best answer that I can give and have a good conscience about it is that there's not enough research to show that vaccines cause autism. I've rehearsed this answer over and over because I had to figure out what logically makes sense, right? So while there are many of parents who have had, and this is something that I've noticed in the developmental reports, sometimes with autism you have reports where a parent said, my child started doing these things, vocalizing normal development up until a particular age. And this, I'm a fairly new supervisor, so I've been supervising for about a year, so I've just been tapping into reading the developmental reports that we get for referrals. But it's been very interesting to see some of those cases, and I don't have all the research to show what's happening consistently with all of those cases at that certain age. But there are some researchers who are very convinced that it's a particular chemical in some of the vaccines that's the cause of autism. However, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's more like his other peers, he was doing some of his other peers.
Yeah.
The challenge with that, to be honest, my husband was very much trying to find the cause of the autism. And you can get caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
I chose to look at it differently because I may never know the cause, but I know it's a fact. So let's figure out where we go from here. How do we deal with it?
This is a good point.
It can be a challenge even within the parental
within
structure.
the parental community.
Yes.
And yeah, parental structure, because
Yes.
there's one parent that's like, see, you shouldn't have given them this, or you should have given them that, and that causes discord. That's another really important part. So typically functioning, if you have a child who's, neurotypical, there can be marital issues, right? Things that you don't agree upon in raising your children. Imagine that having a child who has a developmental delay. Dealing with all the normal things you deal with in your daily life, but also having this additional factor that complicates things. So it's really important too when you're interacting with families who are dealing with these things. Everybody has their stuff, but it's not helpful when they come to a safe place like church and have people rolling their eyes because Connor's in the back excited. That's hard because they came here for a safe space. So just really keep in mind the way that you conduct yourself. Like if you're a safe place and you're trying to establish a safe place in ministry and all of those things, you can run somebody out of the church just like that. And so families and children with disabilities are the most marginalized groups of people. Just throwing that out there. But going back to your vaccination question, that's not something that we can clearly say that vaccines cause autism because there's just not enough research to support that. However, you can definitely choose to vaccinate or not vaccinate your children. That is still your right. Whether or not you do or not, it would be interesting to see if you don't vaccinate or to do a study on all of the families that did not vaccinate and whose children still have autism. That would be pretty interesting for me to hear. Question back.
I watched a show on vaccinations, and I'm not a doctor, but I found it interesting because they said that in my day, when I got shots, the potency has since increased almost 100-fold in the potency, and they've noticed a correlation in the increase of autism. So it's not necessarily the vaccine itself, but the fact that doctors are double, tripling, and quadrupling dosing to get them all done early, and they do it at an earlier age. And they just think that it's something that the babies can't handle, that if they gave them maybe one at a time or two at a time and spaced it out longer or did it at a later date, that they would still be safe. But it's because doctors, just to make money and to get it over with, they just give them this massive dosing. And we all know that, I mean, any of us, if we massive dosed on aspirin, we'd get sick. So I think that's something that needs to be considered too.
That's a good point. I was actually going to pull that out. It's really challenging because we're, as professionals too, I face this question probably every time I get it, and probably multiple times with a new client. They immediately ask me, is it because of the vaccines? I think potency is a factor. If you want to be on the safe side, just make it very clear that you want to space out the vaccines. The other thing too is the correlation between vaccines, right? This increased potency on top of increased screening methods. So there's an increase in the number of cases that we're finding in autism, and people are like, huh? Every time I tell somebody what I do, they're like, oh, it's the vaccines. It's what they're putting in our food. And I laugh sometimes because I'm like, yeah, or the fact that we can catch it now. So there's so many different factors that are happening that it's really challenging to find the exact correlation. But the best thing I think would be like to rule out as many of those factors as you can. So I like that idea of Sandy saying like maybe dispersing the amount of vaccines that you're giving at one time, separating those things rather than just having that sense of fear and just not vaccinating at all, or automatically going to the extreme of this is why my kiddo has this, because it's a rat race. It's definitely a rat race trying to figure out what happened versus this is what it is at this point. How do we get treatment and move forward from here? All right. I think they're telling me that I got to go now. I'm getting kicked out, so thank you guys.
Destiny. I would like to say a big amen, because she gave us a very informative and educational presentation today. And maybe we have to have her back the next time. I would also like to thank Connor, Monique, and Grandma
Cinda
for coming today and give us a live example of how autism is. Thank you so much, and I would like to...
Can I say one more thing really quick?
Yes.
I do want to say, even though Monique came and Connor spoke, Connor is not a spokesperson for autism. I know that's not what you were saying, but I just want to give that disclaimer too. It is still a spectrum, so just know that Connor's autism is different from maybe another case.
Okay, thank you. And then the next presentation will be next week. It's about stroke prevention, and I would love to invite all of you to come back. A doctor from Loma Linda Medical School will be here to speak to us. So before we dismiss and go to the fellowship hall for refreshment, I would like to have a prayer to dismiss. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your Sabbath day, and thank you so much for the presentation that we just heard. We learn new things about what affect our life every day. So be with us as we dismiss today. Take us home safely. Thank you, in Jesus' name, amen.